Good morning everyone, and I'd like to acknowledge Ian Pritchard, contributed towards this presentation and the data. Pulse variety yields. One of the things that we could take from the performance of pulses in 2011 is that the benchmark for yields of pulses that we have in our minds that goes back over 10 or 15 years has probably been raised somewhat through agronomic improvements. There's no doubt that we can actually achieve some very, very good yields with pulses if we give them the attention to detail that they demand, and Graham McConnell, I think, explored that pretty well this morning to show that the top farmers who pay attention to detail and don't compromise do very well with their overall programs, and there's no doubt that with pulses that can happen as well. What I'll do with the talk this morning is I'll go through chickpeas, field peas and lupins, and I'll also make some comments about some agronomics data and also where the markets are at the moment to give you a feel for where they're going. And just as a hint, this paper is on page 169 of the proceedings, and I couldn't work out how to get the field pea table into this without it being far too small. So if you actually want to follow the field pea yield tables, you'll need to look in the book. So 2011 was characterised by exceptional high yields of all commodities. All the forecasts that we had from September on just continued to grow and grow and grow, and it didn't matter which commodity we were talking about, and chickpeas were no different. Chickpeas being one of those crops that require the temperature to warm up. Invariably it's a compromise between the available moisture that's left in the soil and the temperature when it does happen. But in 2011 there was no restriction on moisture as the temperature warmed, and they just kept going and going and going. Topping 4 tonnes in yields at Minginoo, which was exceptional. We have seen it before. More commonly, of course, it's maybe around the 1.5 to 2 tonne mark. The important point to make here, as I was just saying before, I suppose, is with chickpeas in particular, though, is that if you get the agronomy right, you can achieve very, very good yields. 4 tonnes is certainly exceptional, and you wouldn't be expecting that on a regular basis. But if you get the agronomy right and don't compromise, then something better than your long-term average would be easily attainable, and somewhere around the 1.5 to 2 tonne mark should be in the budget every year rather than 1 to 1.5 tonnes. So of the new lines that are coming through, SeedNet, which is the pipeline partner for Pulse Breeding Australia, we're looking at sizes 603, that'll be coming out sometime next couple of years. You might remember that COGO was co-funding a breeding program with DAFWA, in the last couple of years. That's all wrapped up now, but there are 2 releases potentially coming out of that, being 2136 and 2155. Both are very, very competitive with Slasher, and so they're going to be quite exciting. 2155 in particular looks like an exceptional chickpea with some very, very good yields. But unlike SeedNet supply line with Pulse Breeding Australia, Seedmark has the licence for those varieties. So this is the yields that we achieved at Minginoo last year and also at Dalwallinu. This is showing that size of 603 was particularly good at both sites. The interesting thing here is that it was actually a high yielding or highest yielding variety in a low yielding situation as well as a high yielding situation. One of the interesting, if you look at the data here, you'll notice that PBA Slasher is particularly good at Minginoo at 4 tonnes. It was off the pace at Dalwallinu where things weren't quite as good. Genesis 836, which is a much more erect variety and something that we recommend for lower yielding environments, did particularly well in a low yielding environment but couldn't keep up when things got good. Having a variety like 603 that can do better than most in both situations is probably an advantage in most regards. So keep an eye out for 603. If we don't see it this year, hopefully we'll see it released in 2013. Looking at the Seedmark varieties, 2155 and 2136, these were only trialled at Minginoo last year, and you can see that they're very, very competitive with Slasher and better than Genesis 836. The other point that I didn't make at the start, I guess, is that with the choice of varieties that we have in chickpeas is limited to just the 2 at the moment, PBA Slasher and Genesis 836. If you're looking for a variety to choose for 2012, So the advent of these varieties is certainly going to make the suite of varieties that are available to growers far wider and make the choice a little bit better to get something that matches what you require. 2155 and 2136 are equal, if not slightly better, in seed quality, and as you can see, their yields are pretty close to being exactly the same. We'll know more as we get more data over time, but growers I think will find 2155 in particular very, very attractive. Now on the chickpea market, just for your own education, if you don't already aware of it, chickpea is quite unique in that Australia is the leading exporter of chickpeas in the world. But apart from that though, and our rising production, there's no question about swamping demand. It's fairly insatiable on the subcontinent. So if we were to develop a significant chickpea industry in Western Australia, that will have no effect on demand or prices generally. So it's not done, unlike say Albus lupins, which certainly does have a potential ceiling on the market, chickpeas doesn't. So don't be afraid of WA production increasing. We estimated that we had around about 13,000 tonnes produced in Western Australia in 2011, and would like to think that that will certainly improve in 2012. With the exceptional yields that we're seeing, hopefully some neighbours are a bit enthused. And as just a quick plug for those that might be contemplating clients putting in some chickpeas, there will be some chickpea training days being run by Pulse Australia in conjunction with DAFWA and agribusiness in Minganyu, Dalwallinu and Muckenbuden late March, early April, just before Easter. So if you have clients that think they might want to learn a bit and perhaps have some chickpeas on the paddock this year, get in touch with me and I'll let you know. The interesting thing about chickpeas in particular though is the gross margin potential. Its price at the moment is still around $500, very, very competitive with canola. Looking at field peas, the interesting thing about field peas I suppose is that Kaspa was the highest yielding named variety in the trials in 2011. Very excited to see PBA Twilight and PBA Gunya come onto the market in 2010 to assist in average conditions, but when things get good, a longer season variety like Kaspa still is a very, very good variety. So don't throw it out in particular. It was ranked 22 behind quite a lot of crossbreds. Gunya and Twilight were quite a way behind. This is on state rankings as opposed to individual ones. So if you have particularly good yield potential, as was mentioned in the release of Gunya and Twilight last year, Kaspa still remains probably your best option, but of course we don't get conditions like 2011 very often, so we would expect that Kaspa still fits 25 to 30% of the market and Gunya and Twilight will take out the rest. An interesting variety which you'll see in the table was Auspea 1101, ranked 14 in the state, out-yielded Kaspa and certainly looks to have some very good potential, and Auspea 805. We'll have a quick look at those in more detail in a moment. You might also have heard of PBA Aura and PBA Percy. They were released this year, or 2011, for black bacterial blight resistance in the eastern states. They are dun peas as opposed to Kaspa type peas, and I just want to make the point that I think we have a unique situation in WA. We are supplying peas of a Kaspa type more than a dun type. If we go back to being dun producers, we fall back into the field of competing with the Russians and to some degree the Canadians, rather than having something that's quite unique. So I'd be quite wary of increasing our dun production. They ranked fairly well on yields. The Aura did okay. PBA Percy was a little bit more average. And as I said, you can follow those varieties in the table in the book. Of the new releases, the interesting one I think is 805, pea seed-borne mosaic virus resistant. That's going to be particularly important for the southeast area where trial data suggests it can take out anything between 8 and 25% of yield if the level of pea seed-borne mosaic virus is high enough. It's early to mid-flowering and appears to be broadly adapted, and would like to think we might see that being released in 2013. 1101 and 1104 both also show some interest. 1101 in particular because it is also a Kaspa type. 1104 would have to think about whether we want to introduce a new dun type, depending on the attitude of growers and the marketplace. Just on the field pea market, we're obviously a very, very minor player, just several percent, if that, of world trade, so whatever we do doesn't make a scrap of difference to the world. One of the interesting things is that most of the production is centred in Esperance, and they pool their own peas and sell them in bulk into markets, and it has become quite difficult over the last 2 or 3 years to find a buyer, even though the price has been quite good. Actually finding a market has been a little bit difficult, so those sorts of things have actually eased the interest in field peas to some degree. And while we might expect chickpeas to rise, I think field pea area will certainly plateau, if not fall slightly in 2012. Lupins, some good promise in the breeding areas with lupins. PBA Garniti was released in 2011 and shows very, very good yields in the 2011 data. 2325 and 2333 also show very, very good yield and quality promise, and we'll see that in the table in a moment. But the promise from the Lupin breeding program is that we have some improvement to be made, and that should generate some interest. As an agronomic tip, I know people are very, very upset with what Meldrum does, and increasingly we're leaving lupins in the paddock because they're of somewhat low value and there are more important things to go and get, and by the time you come back to the Meldrum we've potentially lost a reasonable amount of grain. So for those that can't wait for PBA Garniti to become available, there's quite limited supplies this year, and it may well be at least next year before we can get a sizable supply of seed. I'd recommend you go to Corrimup, a little bit behind on yield, but almost risk-free as far as throwing seed on the ground while you're harvesting more important crops. So that will save a lot of heartache for growers if you go to Corrimup, at least in the short term. Very, very easy to get hold of. There's bucket loads that have been grown, particularly in the Minganyu area, and free to trade. So recommend that you have a look at that. So the yield results from 2011 confirm that PBA Garniti is a very, very competitive variety across the state and will certainly make a big difference to production, particularly where growers are dissatisfied with Meldrum. That's not to say that Meldrum's yields are shabby, and all the yields of Meldrum in these trials are taken off. The harvest is pretty much as maturity occurs, so there's very little losses as farmers see in their own paddocks where they have to leave them for some time. So Meldrum is still a high yielding variety, but just carries that harvest risk. Just have a look at the yields of 2325 and 2333. 2325 is recommended for, it has tangel and metribuzin tolerance, tangel type resistance to anthracnose, I should say. 2333 looks like it's going to be a high yielding Meldrum, Garniti, every other lupin replacement type for most of the wheat belt. Possibly not so much when Gennabillup still has a significant advantage for bean yellow mosaic virus resistance on the south coast, so it will maintain its niche there, but 2333 looks like it potentially could go statewide as a Meldrum type in scope replacement. Very, very important. So that's just confirming there that both look pretty good. And I'll just finish off quickly by suggesting that if you're interested in some of these varieties, that you might like to contact these guys, SeedNet Sam Densley, Seedmark Tim O'Day, and interesting that the SeedNet partners are also the Seedmark partners, so they must be doing some good deals, Donks and Chris and Bill. So please contact those gentlemen if you are interested in variety seed of any of the varieties. The one variety I didn't mention just quickly is the new Albus Lupin, Waylab 2014. That will be hopefully released in spring by Seedmark, and once again that could see the revival of a long-held in the heart industry in the north, the Albus industry. So we look forward to that.
Thank you very much.